So again, good evening. My name is Sean Morrissey. I am the Director of College Relations at MEFA. I've been with MEFA for about 6 months now. And MEFA is a state authority. We've been around since 1982. We were created by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to help families plan, save, and pay for college. We have a lot of free services available to families that if you sign up for our emails, you can sign up for webinars, find out about sessions like this. You can always contact us for free advice about saving and paying for college. And we have a lot of great financial aid administrators from across Massachusetts and across the country today to join us to talk about appeals. And I'll let our panelists introduce themselves.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Danetta Burgess, and I am part of the financial aid team at the American University in Washington, D.C. I look forward to engaging with you all this evening.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Kruder. I'm the Executive Director of Student Financial Services at Mount Holyoke College, which is a small private liberal arts college that is a women's college, gender diverse in South Hadley, Massachusetts. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Smith. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Financial Assistance at Stonehill College in Easton. We are a small Catholic liberal arts institution.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin DeRusi. I'm the Associate Director of Financial Aid at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. We're a medium-sized four-year public institution, and I'm happy to be here with you guys.
Good evening. I'm Michelle Smith. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at UMass Lowell. And welcome.
And we also have my colleague, Stephanie Wells, behind the scenes. She's going to be answering the questions for you.
Good evening, everyone.
Okay, so just a little bit before we get started with our panel, I just want to give a little bit of background on appeals. So the appeal process for financial aid, just like the awarding process of financial aid, is going to differ from school to school. So a lot of the questions that we are going to have answered, you'll hear different answers from different colleges and universities. And the answer sometimes is it depends, because each situation will be handled on a case-by-case basis. And it may be handled differently from campus to campus because they may have different policies on that. So there are no cut and dry rules around appeals, but we're going to hope to give you some background on what is normally allowed in an appeal, what those look like, and what the process looks like to appeal your financial aid. So for the first question, I'm going to go to Bill. Bill, can you just lead us through a little bit about what is a financial aid appeal?
Thank you. What is a financial aid appeal is kind of the starting point of today's presentation. In the simplest of terms, it's really a request of an institution to either reevaluate your financial need or simply request for additional money or resources to attend college. Appeals at different institutions mean different things, and different things are appealable at different institutions. The two main areas of appeals that are most common are for institutions that have merit scholarships. Some of those institutions will allow you to appeal that decision. There might be a process in which they will reevaluate that student based on the competitiveness of the class. Other buckets of appeals tend to rely on financial need. You'll hear different colleges talk about that tonight. Financial need in itself is the way that the school is determining a family's financial strength, and then what resources ultimately the institution can provide towards meeting that need. Not all schools will handle the meeting of need in the same way, so it's important for you to know that the answers may vary, but those are two main kind of categories of appeals. The last kind of category of appeal is really a bucket for anything else. Different institutions may have very specific types of scholarships that may be based on community service or achievement in high school. And those may have completely separate appeal processes, and those would be very specific to the different types of institutions and the programs in which that you're applying.
For our next question, as families get award letters, oftentimes those look very different from college to college, and a student may receive varying award letters from different schools. Danetta, why is it that financial aid offers differ so much from school to school?
Thank you, Sean. So financial aid offers differ from school to school, first of all, based on the type of school. So it could be a four-year private, it could be a community college, it could be a state college. And so based on the type of school, the type of funding that it's available may differ. It's based on availability of funds at each and resources at each of the colleges and universities. And so in addition to that, different schools have different requirements to determine a student's financial aid need. So for example, at American University, we require the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Most private institutions will ask for that CSS profile, which provides additional information so that we can make sure that we and our colleagues at various colleges and universities can make sure that we are giving the best award package, offer letter to each of the students. So it may be one school has more institutional funding, one school may have more merit scholarships available, they may have more donor scholarships or restricted scholarships that are available. So the short answer is it depends on the funding the school has. It depends on how they evaluate students. So it just depends on all of those various things. I always tell families, it's okay to call and ask questions if you're not sure. As Bill was explaining the different appeals process, you know, it may be it's something that you need to appeal. There's been a change. We need to appeal this. You know what I mean? So that is why different schools and what they put on the offer letters can be different based on the school as well.
And if I can add, I did notice there was a question about state institutions and financial aid availability. Salem State, speaking for Salem State, we rely very heavily on Massachusetts state financial aid funds, and those are unfortunately limited. Our best advice to prospective students is always file your FAFSA early so you get the earliest award letter, because the truth is, as the calendar year progresses through, we do start running low on funds. Salem State does have our own institutional money, which is tied to financial need and to merit. So it's sort of a combination of the both. Those funds are pretty much set. Those are decided when a student applies and completes the application process. The other funds we do start running out. Come May, June, we've pretty much exhausted our state funds that we have to offer. So always file your FAFSA early, get in the door early.
Deadlines are so very important as well, meeting those deadlines as well.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Michelle next. What are some reasons that families appeal?
So there's a variety of reasons that a family would appeal depending on what you're looking for. So probably one of the most common appeals that we receive are income changes. So when you file your FAFSA, you're filing with your 2020-21 income, and things can change over time. So we may see that a family would appeal because of a change in their income, reduced hours, loss of a job, loss of unemployment. There may be a situation where families' loss of child support has ended because the student has aged out of child support. Also, other reasons for appeal is a parent passed away after they filed the FAFSA, or the parents have divorced or separated after they filed the FAFSA and they are now living in separate households. Some other reasons are that a family may have very high, unusual medical expenses that they paid out of pocket in 2020-21 that's not reflected on the FAFSA. Paying elementary or secondary high school private tuition in 2021. Some schools will take that into consideration. Also, a loss of a benefit, like a workman's comp benefit. So those are change of income appeals, and we see that most frequently when we're talking about appeals. We also will see that students will come and appeal because the FAFSA is asking for parent information and they're unable to provide parent information. So at UMass Lowell, if a student cannot answer one of the independency questions on the FAFSA, but they don't have contact with their parents, we would have them meet with a financial aid advisor to talk about those situations. It's not simply that the parent doesn't want to fill out the FAFSA, but the student may be estranged from the parent due to physical and mental abuse, abandonment, they may be asylees. So those type of appeals, we do work very closely with the student on. There is also appeals for a change in your costs. So part of financial aid, we as schools, we come up with your cost of attendance, what it's going to cost you for a year. And some students may have unusual expenses related to a disability or a medical condition that require extra costs that other students may not have. So a student could appeal, a family could appeal about those costs. Also, childcare costs for independent students. Some schools will allow you to appeal based on the cost of purchasing a computer. Usually with those cost increase appeals, at least, speaking from UMass Lowell, that would allow the family, if they needed to borrow extra loan, they might not necessarily get extra grant money for that. But with the change of income appeals that I originally started with, those families are hoping that by changing the elements on the FAFSA that they may be eligible for more financial aid grants or work study or loans by doing those appeals. Each school handles appeals very differently, and the reasons for appeals, they will guide you as to what documentation to provide depending on your circumstances. That was a lot, sorry.
Thank you, Michelle. That's great. That was really thorough. Next, we're going to go to Kevin. What are the steps for making an appeal once a family decides they need to do that?
The most important stuff, I always say most of us in financial aid say we have one of the best jobs in the world because we help students achieve and realize their dreams. However, we can't just give out money as much as we would like to. Like, we have to answer to state and federal, as well as our own institutional officials, to our spending. So that being said, financial aid administrators love documentation. It's all about, we need to be able to show somebody why we did something to your FAFSA or why we increased your award. So always the best advice is go into it prepared. Even before you reach out to the college, think about why you need to appeal. If it is a loss of an income, if it's a loss of a wage earner through, death or divorce, start gathering all your documentation, your paperwork, anything you think the financial aid office, don't send it, but start collecting it. And then the next best step would be to reach out to the financial aid office and kind of explain to them what your situation is. And they're going to guide you as to what we're going to need in order to actually fulfill and, calculate a new FAFSA or make changes or figure out if you're actually eligible to appeal your financial aid. But documentation is key. Make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, that if it's medical expenses, excessive medical expenses, keep in mind that we're only looking at out-of-pocket medical expenses, not whatever the overall cost is that may have been covered by insurance. So start collecting receipts for medications, for co-pays. Just kind of gather all your documents together and then reach out and say, hey, this is my situation. What do you need from me? What are my next steps? I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add anything to that.
I think one of the most important things that families don't may not know is that the information that you share with us is kept confidential.
Yes.
And so I think that's an important piece. So whatever you share with us stays with us. And the more, like Kevin said, the more documentation you can provide, the better.
We had a student actually provide us 75 pages of documentation. He had kept every single receipt that you could even imagine. And he bound it all in a book and sent it in. But you know what? It made the appeal that much easier for us to approve and then to, work his FAFSA and recalculate, his need for our university. I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting you send us 45 pages of information though.
I think a lot of us have this information on the website. So if you're getting ready to appeal and you're collecting documents, just going to the school that you're going to be appealing and typing in professional judgment appeal, income appeal, you're going to come up with at least a good guideline on what to start collecting and kind of help you guide you through that process.
Thank you. Taylor, can you guide us through what the process looks like on your campus? And then if anyone else has a process that's very different from Taylor's, if you could talk about what that process looks like that may differ on your campus, because the process will differ from campus to campus.
Sure. So kind of talking about what Kevin spoke about is our appeal conversations at Mount Holyoke College always start with a conversation. And so typically when we're speaking with our families and students, they've received a financial aid offer letter from us, and they're kind of left feeling like, yeah, I get that, but here's XYZ that's happening in our household that isn't necessarily represented on the FAFSA and CSS profile, which Mount Holyoke collects. At an institution like Mount Holyoke, we meet what we call full demonstrated financial need, and not a lot of institutions actually do that. And so that will be a very specific question you can ask of the institutions you're looking at. Those will have different appeal answers and different appeal processes than other institutions like Kevin's, where it's just federal and state aid and a small pocket of institutional money. You'll see different processes through those different institutions. But for us, it starts with a conversation. We typically guide our families and students to say there is no information that you can tell us or provide to us that will actually have a negative impact on your financial aid package that we have already offered you. Our goal is to get and understand your financial circumstances as best as possible, recognizing that the FAFSA and CSS profile do not ask all the questions they should be asking in order to find that full picture. I did see a question come in that's, do we wait until we deposit and say we're coming before we appeal? No, please don't do that to us. We want to make sure that you're making the most informed decision that you can be making as a family, and that means having those conversations ahead of the deposit stage for you. For us, once we have that conversation, you'll talk with our counselors about whether or not we actually feel an appeal is relevant to you. We will be totally transparent if, based on what we're seeing in terms of numbers and what you're telling us is happening within the household, if it won't make a change, we won't ask you to jump through the hurdles just to produce nothing. We will have that very honest, transparent conversation. It won't feel good to have it, but we'd rather have it ahead of time than have you all work so hard to produce the materials just to get a no at the end of the day. Okay, so if we've made it through those first two steps, we say, yes, you have an appealable circumstance. Here's what we need, and you send that in. My institution meets weekly, and we review appeals as a committee, right? So that means that we're trying to remove all the bias in the situation. We're trying to make it as equitable across all of our students as possible, and it goes to committee. So it wouldn't be just me reviewing it. If I was your counselor, a team of 8 administrators is actually reviewing that as well. That all happens within a span of 7 business days. That's our commitment to you. We know these are high stakes times for you and your family. And so you should always, when you're entering into these conversations with multiple aid offices, always ask them what the timeline is so that you know when you can expect to hear back. I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything different that they want to add based on their colleges.
So at American, thank you, Taylor, for reminding me about the full demonstrated need, because we do the same thing. So I think that's an important piece, and that's an important question, like you said, for us to ask the colleges and universities as you're contacting them. We have a online appeal portal where families can submit the documents and submit the appeals. When families ask us, we do have those conversations, and like you said, fully transparency, saying, you know, this is not an appealable item. We can't tell you not to appeal. You still have the right to appeal. But based on what the conversation has been, that's not an appealable item. We do have on the portal, there's one for a general appeal, and there's one based on a change of circumstance. And because we also request the CSS profile, there's a non-custodial parent appeal process as well. So we have that information it's on our website. Families can upload the information to us, and it's reviewed by the Financial Aid Appeals Committee. And we do let families know when they will receive a decision on that appeal, when the appeals committee is meeting, and you know, within 7 to 10 business days, you'll have a decision on that appeal. If we need additional information, we will definitely contact them.
Salem State we also have an online form, which basically goes, we have one person who's 90% of her job is to process appeals. And generally a student or a parent or both would fill out the online appeal form. It automatically goes to her. She reviews it, and within 24 to 48 hours, we'll reach out to the family to say, okay, this is an appealable appeal. These are the documents that we're going to need. This is what I'm going to need you to show me. I will say, if you already have a 0 EFC on your FAFSA, those typically, at Salem State, we're looking to lower the estimated family contribution, the EFC. So if you're already at 0, there's really nowhere we can go beyond that. However, we'll have the conversation with you. Are you just at a point that you need just, you know, a little bit more for your family to make the financial decision and to be able to financially afford attending Salem State? So in the case, even if you have a 0 EFC, it does not hurt to appeal, because we may have that conversation, and you know, we can maybe give you a little more housing grant to get you over that hurdle. So we like to say, the worst that can happen is we'll say no. It does not hurt to ask anything, because that's all we can do is say no. And 9 out of 10 times we're not going to say no. We might be able to help you with a little bit.
While we're talking about documentation for appeals, we received a good question here on some institutions may require students to complete what's called verification before going through an appeal process. Verification, when you hear the word verification in the financial aid world, it tends to drive towards a federal process, but that's not always the case. It's a federal verification process. Verification is not a process that you should fear. So in the event that you're selected for verification, whether or not you appeal or not, it's really a requirement by the institutions, specifically institutions that receive Title IV funding from the federal government, to verify basically a percentage of their applicant pool. And what it is it's ensuring that you filled out the forms correctly. Oftentimes that can be seen as a negative, like you're auditing my information. But the positive of that, and many aid offices, I think, would agree, is that kind of as Taylor also said, sometimes there's difficult conversations. Kevin alluded to this as well. We rather have you go through a verification process, provide documentation, ensure you filled out the forms correctly. That way we can be honest and transparent and know that you have been evaluated for any aid that you could be. And so if you do hear the term, hey, I was selected for verification in order to complete an appeal, proceed with that, provide the documentation that the schools are asking for, because it's only going to allow the school to say to you more definitively that yes, the aid that you have is the most appropriate for you.
Okay, let's throw this question out to the group. So what about if a family receives various awards from many colleges and they receive a very large scholarship from one college, but then the first choice school, they're not receiving that kind of aid from that school, and they want, should they go to the first choice school and let them know that they've received a larger aid package from somewhere else?
I can kind of start this off. Salem State, we unfortunately are not in a position that we can match another institution's financial aid offer. But what we want parents and students to realize is don't just look at the overall financial aid package, the dollar amount. What you want to really look at is what your out-of-pocket cost is going to be. So Salem State may only offer you $15,000 in overall financial aid, and Stonehill, sorry to pick on you, Bill, may offer you $25,000. But the cost of attendance at Salem State is less than the cost of attendance at Stonehill. So you may end up, even with that only $15,000 of financial aid from Salem State, have less out-of-pocket expenses than you may at Stonehill. So don't just look at the dollar amount on the on your financial aid offer. Look at the cost of attendance. Look at what you and your family will need to come up with out of pocket to make that school a reality for you.
What I would typically say for families who find themselves in that situation is I typically ask, did you submit any materials to that institution that you have not submitted to us? If so, we want to make sure that we're evaluating you in the same lens that that other institution evaluated your child with. The other thing that I would say is I typically ask, have you achieved anything since you submitted your admissions application back in the fall, right? So by now we've seen that some GPAs have finalized. We know class standings in a lot of instances. You may have taken a lot of AP credits and done really well and performed really well in those classes. I'm asking our students, what's changed since the point at which you submitted your admissions application and we determined your merit award then? I always say it's a fair question to ask. We just ask that families be respectful of us when they get the answer back, even if it's one that they might not like. I don't think there's harm in asking because, as Bill alluded to earlier, merit scholarships are this really interesting idea where you're awarded based on the caliber of class that you're coming in with, and that class isn't determined until we've read all the applications and we've sent out offers. Right. And so there is always a chance that that merit scholarship could change based on when the institution is awarding that merit. It never hurts to ask, especially if you have a piece of information that's new or missing from your original admission application.
And at some schools, with the merit and the financial aid, need-based financial aid is separate. So you may be talking with the financial aid office saying, is there something additional that we can do? And the financial aid office will go over with you the changes to the FAFSA, but your inquiry really is about merit. And so you may need to reach out to someone else. You may be directed to the admissions office. So some schools like at UMass Lowell, merit decisions are made very separately than financial aid decisions. So knowing sort of where you're coming from with your appeal really helps us direct you to the person that could best help you. If you do have a change in your GPA, if something has changed in your academics, then it may be worth having that conversation with the admissions folks to find out if merit is an option to change or even become qualified for if you weren't qualified in the first place. And then if you're having a financial aid appeal, you can talk with the financial aid office about the documentation you need. So there are many different types of appeals and who can help you. Some schools it is very much wrapped together, and some schools it may be separated.
Great, thank you very much. Bill, what should families expect once they filed an appeal? What's next? What should their expectations be?
Sure. Expectations, there's two components to really what expectation is. And then also I'll cover very quickly about appeals in subsequent years, kind of in future terms, what that means. So there's often an expectation from the family of when they apply for aid, and this kind of ties into some of the questions that are also being asked of, you initially apply for aid, and for many families, you receive the basic application that most people know is the federal form, the FAFSA form, and that actually provides you with an output. That output provides you with what's called the EFC, soon to be changing, but currently it is the EFC, and that EFC ultimately stands for your expected family contribution. And the 2-second, what the EFC is and what it is not, that could be a whole podcast or what are we, panelists? What are we? We're not a podcast in itself. But the EFC ultimately is the ability for the student and the family to absorb costs over time. So it's looking at past earning, past assets, current, and future. Now, when you say future and the ability to absorb costs over time, there is some component of indebtedness or the ability to borrow built into that. You also heard a key thing. So oftentimes families will say, my EFC is $15,000. And that means I should only be paying $15,000 to attend an institution. For many institutions across the country, that's actually not the case. In fact, even for institutions that meet 100% of need, many of those institutions are not meeting need off of the federal FAFSA form. They're asking families to provide and fill out the CSS profile, you heard that tonight, or other institutional applications. Stonehill has an institutional application. So we ask for additional documentation. We then calculate kind of our own level of need for that family, and then we provide you with that output. Oftentimes, the expectation of what the award should be and what you actually received, it's not aligned. We understand that, we appreciate that, and in many instances, it's just the reality of that. Oftentimes, families will say, how do I make up the difference? That's really up to the family and the student to decide. Many institutions will work with families on options, but it's up to the family to figure that out. When it comes to appeal expectations, the same things kind of hold true. As someone who participates in reviewing appeals, oftentimes you may see an appeal where a family will express, in order for me to attend, I need another $15,000 annually on top of the existing package. Now, I may be reviewing that with a committee, and the committee and I may say, at most, we can give the student an additional $2,000. And so there's oftentimes that push and pull between what is available to the student and what the family may actually think that they should be receiving. The very last piece of this kind of component is on appeals of expectations is the potential of action in the future. So oftentimes you may know I'm facing retirement, or, hey, I've caught wind, there may be severe layoffs in 12 months. And those types of situations are hard for us to help with in the moment. Many offices and many aides directors would say to families things like, when it becomes a reality, there's a process for us to evaluate that. Oftentimes, schools may not do a review on the hypothetical. We wait until we actually have the documentation and then we review it. Again, always limit your expectation, always understand that the reality of what the response may be from an institution, even if that response is a no, may not match what the family is actually seeking.
And if I might add, at Salem State, you don't need to wait until before school year starts or until, like, you can appeal at any point during a calendar year. So if everything's hunky-dory in September and then something big financially hits your family in December, you can appeal in December, even though the academic year has already started, the semester has already gone by. You can always appeal at any point during the academic year or the calendar year. What we do at Salem State is if there is a loss of income during the academic year, we do ask families to wait 4 to 6 weeks before filing an appeal, just so that we can get a better financial picture. So we don't know if, the wage earner may find another job or get asked back or be collecting unemployment benefits. So I wouldn't say if there's a financial impact to appeal the next day. Definitely, as always, just give your financial aid office a call. We do enjoy speaking with parents and with students and spreading information and kind of helping out the best we can. Like I said, we have the best jobs. We're helping people achieve their goals and dreams. So we're open and we're going to try our hardest to get you where you need to be within the confines of federal and state laws, of course. But, you don't have to wait to file an appeal till the school year starts. You can file an appeal at any point during the year. If it is an income issue, we do ask that you wait a few weeks. And again, you would contact us, we'd reach out to you and say, all right, why don't you check back with me in 6 weeks and we'll take it from there.
We've had a question in the chat. Does the first year award have any effect on the 3 other years, or is each year separate?
It's a good question. At Salem State, it could fluctuate a little bit. It all depends on what's coming through in the FAFSA. So if the wage earner gets a new job the next year and their income increases, that could impact the financial aid award 2 years down the line, because as you know, we're doing prior year. So we're using tax data from 2021 for the 2023 September start season. So financial aid packages, at least at Salem State, we try to keep them consistent because we are basically going off of the EFC on the FAFSA.
Yeah, I would just say that make sure you ask that of every institution you're working with, because the policies will vary. So an example is that Mount Holyoke College, our international students are locked in to their contribution at the point of admission, and they aren't reevaluated through their 4 years with us. Where with our domestic students who are, from the US, they are reevaluated each year. Merit scholarships, on the other hand, if it's just merit, it sticks with you all 4 years and won't change.
Okay. Is there anything else our panel thinks we should share about the appeal process tonight?
Just want to reiterate, it doesn't hurt to ask. If you have questions, if you're not sure, if your family's if you're on the fence with, can we afford this? Or would it be better for me to go here? Contact us. It doesn't, again, the worst we can do is say no, but we will have the conversation with you and explain to you why we need to say no for your circumstances.
Stephanie, are there any questions that you'd like us to cover that you've seen in the chat?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of questions tonight, which is great. And I have been answering them feverishly and getting a lot of help from the panelists, so thank you. So I apologize if I missed this because I was answering questions, but we did have a few questions that have been answered in the chat, but might be worth talking about related to merit scholarships and appealing merit aid.
This is the process for appealing merit aid different from appealing need-based aid.
I'll help here. Merit aid is I think Taylor already kind of said this, merit aid is the one that's going to vary even more greater at institution to institution. The schools that offer merit aid may offer a lot of it or very little of it. And not only that, how you get it and who gets determined is very institutionally driven. And so all of those questions really should be directed to the individual institutions in which you're applying. So you could ask the question, even if you weren't offered merit aid, do you have merit aid? And if so, is there an appeal process to get it? That's a viable question for families. If you're looking at how to appeal merit versus how you would appeal need, that process too could vary at different institutions. And what you want to do is find out from those different institutions what the process is. Taylor also has brought up a good point. Kevin has brought up a good point about meeting and having conversations with the aid offices. That's an important piece to this. Oftentimes, a simple call to either an admission office or financial aid office or student accounts, depending on the institution, is a good starting point, because as you can kind of guess, for every institution and then every type of appeal, you could have a different process or different forms. And so figure out what it is to start, and that'll save you time and energy and also make the most efficient appeal.
That's great. Thank you, Bill. We also had some questions come in about negotiating. So competing schools, narrowing down to a few schools. Should you send your financial aid offer from one to the other one if you want to appeal, if they gave more money? What's the best advice from folks about appealing it for no special circumstance, just looking at two competing schools? And it could have, Bill just mentioned merit, but it could apply to need-based aid too. Is that something that's colleges would want to look at? I know I've talked to a lot of colleges who have said, yeah, send it over, let me take a look, especially if it's a school of similar cost, but I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, I do think that it's definitely school specific. So at UMass Lowell, we don't use other schools' merit or financial aid offers in our decision. So if you're going to look for additional, let's say, merit aid, then you absolutely should contact the admissions office and you should explain why you would like to have more aid or more merit, or why you think you should qualify for merit. Have those conversations. But for some schools like ours, seeing all the different offers from other schools, because we have limited funding, isn't going to be a driving force in the decision to increase a merit or add a merit onto someone. So it really does change from school to school and what the school's looking for.
I also think that sometimes I talk with families and they think they want to appeal because of X, but when we're chatting with families, there's actually something we can do over here in this bucket that maybe the family wasn't even considering based on each individual institution's needs analysis and how we offer financial aid. And so I always say, like, don't just share the thing that you think is actually what's going to impact your financial aid. Share everything that your family is working through right now in terms of finances, because in that instance, the counselor you're working with is actually at that moment serving as your advocate and ally in this area, and they're going to take it to committee and they're going to kind of tell your story and narrative about what's happening in your household and fitting it into the parameters that each institution has. And so it really is more like a deeper dive into what's going on holistically, not necessarily just focusing on the one clear, distinct thing that you think might be relevant.
That's excellent, Taylor. Thank you. We've actually had a couple questions about this, so I'm going to throw it out to the group. I did add one, but age of parents, can you just briefly talk about that, and if that's considered, especially if they're in their 60s, getting near retirement age? I know age of the parent is part of the financial aid formula, but what else could be taken into consideration for those circumstances?
One thing I want to kind of throw out there that's semi-related is for schools such as Salem State, where we only rely on the FAFSA, if you've done, or if you're kind of preparing for retirement and you're doing a 401k rollover or anything with your retirement funds, those don't always come across on the FAFSA for what they really are, and they can really inflate your estimated family contribution. So if you're doing a 401k, a 401 rollover or anything like that, definitely reach out to the school, because we've seen the EFC increase by $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 because a rollover doesn't show on the FAFSA the same way that it shows on your actual 1040 tax return. So anything, if you're swapping retirement accounts, stuff like that, definitely contact the financial aid office just to make sure that it's showing valid and appropriately on your FAFSA.
Great, thank you.
Stephanie, I can add something to that too. I think everything that Kevin said is totally true. I think this is something that you'll see differ significantly based on the institutions that you're working with. And so this would be one where we would encourage you to pick up the phone and call the top 3 choices and ask them if they're taking it into account or how that's being factored in. You'll probably hear 3 very different answers is what I'm guessing. But it'll give you a much clearer understanding of how that's being used and taken into account.
Thank you. Don't see any other questions coming in, Sean. I have one that I'm answering. Actually, here's one. Here's a good one. The process. So I know we've talked about that early on, but calling, email, Zoom, is there a preference for how you'd like to handle it at your schools?
I would say, go, as I think Michelle had mentioned earlier, go to that school's financial aid website and the outline will be there. So they'll specify, give us a call or shoot us an email and we'll respond and let you know. I think it really depends on the institution and, the actual office and how busy they are. But I enjoy Zoom, I enjoy emails, phone calls, show up at our door and I'll be happy to meet with you. So it all depends on the institution and what their process is.
I think it also depends on where they are too, right? If it's easy to drive there, but if it's in California from Massachusetts, a Zoom might be better.
My rule of thumb is whatever is going to help you all understand the process and the most effective way for you all. So whatever you're most comfortable with is actually our preferred method. If you'd rather work by phone, we'll have a phone appointment. If you'd rather come in and see us, awesome. We love visitors. That gets you on our campus. We love that even more. It's really what is most helpful to you all in the moment. We now have been forced and now love the flexibility that COVID gave us in terms of remote virtual meetings, phone calls. We're used to bouncing around based on a family's preference. So please lean into your family's preference, not what's best for us. At some point, we will ask you to put something down in writing, but it never has to start in writing.
That's
And
great. Thank you,
I
Tina.
agree with Taylor. I would say that, in the number of years that I've done it, I feel with appeals, a call it's great to have some kind of communication, verbally, whether it's a call or a Zoom, because this is new to you, right? So you start off with a question, and if you're emailing that question, I might answer that, but because you're new, it's going to set off a series of other questions in your mind because you don't understand the next step, or my answer made you think of something else. So if you can, and if you're comfortable with it, I really love having the conversation about the appeals, just the back and forth that comes with a verbal conversation, because again, this is new for you. And I want to make sure that I'm answering all of your questions, and going back and forth in email. Sometimes there are things that get missed that afterwards you're like, oh goodness, I should have asked that question. So whatever works for you, whatever's comfortable coming in or calling or Zoom, we're happy with that. But if you can, I would definitely try to speak to someone to make sure that you're being fully helped and getting all of your questions answered.
That's great advice, Michelle. I know that in the past when I worked on the college campus and was dealing with appeals, there would be oftentimes that a family would come in with a certain circumstance and thinking that was what their appeal was based on. And then over the course of the conversation, we found out that was not an appealable event, but there was something else going on in the family that certainly was. that we are able to then find more financial aid to help them based on that conversation that we had and other circumstances that were going on. So a conversation can really be helpful. Okay, Steph, any other
It's been great.
questions?
Nope, Kevin's answering one right now, the last one, I think.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Please go to the MEFA website, mefa.org, and you can follow us on social media as well. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anywhere that you can find social media. MEFA probably has some kind of an account there that you can engage with us. And I hope you found this helpful. We will be sending out a recording of this within the next couple of days that you can review as well. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you very
Thank you
much
so
to our
much.
panelists. You are all very helpful tonight. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
It all.